Here is the notes video for Chapter 6, Lesson 1. Solve one-step addition and subtraction equations. Feel free to pause the video, rewind, or rewatch any parts at any time. Let's start with our vocabulary startup. An equation is a sentence stating that two quantities are equal. So an equation must have an equal sign. We've mostly been looking at expressions which do not have an equal sign. The value of a variable that makes an equation true is called a solution. So a solution is the answer to the equation. The equations x plus 2 equals 6 and x equals 4 are equivalent equations because they both share the same solution of 4. So an equivalent equation is two equations that share the same solution. It says circle the equations below that are equivalent to x equals 3. Use algebra tiles if needed. I'm going to zoom in so that I have more space to write. X plus 3 equals 6. That equals 3. Now let's show my work on the side. X plus 3 equals 6. If I subtract 3 from both sides, I'm using the subtraction property of equality. I'm left with x equals 3. So this one is equivalent to x equals 3. Now if I subtract 3 from both sides of the equal sign for this one, I'm left with x equals 0, which does not equal 3. For this one, x plus 1 equals 6. If I subtract 1 from both sides, I'm left with x equals 5. So it also doesn't work. But x plus 1 equals 4. If I subtract 1 from both sides, I'm left with x equals 4 minus 1, which is 3. So this one also works, and it's equivalent. Then the other one, x plus 6 equals 8. If I subtract 6 from both sides, I'm left with x equals 2. So that doesn't work either. But this one, if I subtract 2 from both sides of the equal sign, I'm left with x equals 3. So this one does work. Okay, so now I found the equations that are equivalent to x equals 3. Here's our real world link. So video games. Robin has some video games, and then she bought 4 more games. So she has some, and she buys 4 more. Now she has 10 games. This scenario can be described using the equation x plus 4 equals 10. Now, what does x represent in the equation? X represents the number of video games she had at the beginning. That she started with. In the number 2, it says, write 2 different equations that are equivalent to x plus 4 equals 10. So the solution to x plus 4 equals 10, x plus 4 equals 10. If I subtract 4 from both sides, then x equals 6. So I have to find an equivalent equation to x equals 6. So x equals 6 is one example. And another example could be x plus 6 equals 12. If I subtract 6 from both sides of the equation, I'm left with x equals 6. So x plus 6 equals 12. And those are both equivalent equations. See if you can come up with one on your own. Now we're looking at the notes of subtraction property of equality, and I mentioned that previously, but the subtraction property of equality states that two sides of an equation remain equal when you subtract the same number from each side. So whatever you subtract from one side, you have to subtract from the other. So gives us a simple example, A equals B. Then if I subtract C from both sides, they still remain equal. You can use bar diagrams and the work backward problem solving strategy to solve equations arithmetically. Or you can use the properties of equality to solve equations algebraically. So it gives us example number 1. So it says solve x plus 6 equals 4. And notice that they subtracted 6 from both sides of the equation and we're left with x equals -2. Then they checked it by substituting in -2 for x. 4 equals 4, so it was checked and it's true. For example 2, we're solving for -5 equals b plus 8. So we're solving for b. So if you subtract 8 from both sides, you're left with -5 plus a -8, which is -13, equals b. So b equals -13. Then they substituted in -13 for b, and they were left with -5 equals -5. Sentence is true, they checked it. Got it? Now try these problems. So give this problem a try and then check your answers using the video in the next minute or two. Okay, we're back. Solve each equation, check your solution. I see that I have a 6 on both sides and I want to get y by itself, so I'm going to use the subtraction property of equality. Subtract 6 from both sides. I'm left with y equals 9 minus 6, which is 3. So A is y equals 3. B is x plus 3 equals 1. Subtract 3 from both sides. I'm using the subtraction property of equality. And x equals 1 minus 3, which is -2. Remember our integer addition and subtraction practice. And then C is -3 equals A plus 4. If I subtract 4 from both sides, whatever I do to one side, I have to do the other. When I subtract 4 from both sides, 4 minus 4 becomes 0. So A plus 0 is just A. -4 plus -3, or -3 plus -4 is -7. So A equals -7. You can check the solution by substituting back in the value to the equation. So 3 plus 6 equals 9. 9 equals 9. Check, that's true. -2 plus 3 equals 1. -2 plus 3 is 1. 1 equals 1. That's true. Let's substitute in -7 for A. So it's -3 equals -7 plus 4. -7 plus 4 is -3. -3 equals -3. Check. So take a look at example 3. An angelfish can grow to be 12 inches long. If an angelfish is 8.5 inches long, then a clownfish, or longer than a clownfish, how long is a clownfish? So they wrote an angelfish is 8.5 inches longer than a clownfish, or 8 5/10. Let C represent the length of the clownfish, so C for clown. And they said 12 equals 12 plus 8.5. Then they solved it. They subtracted 8.5 from both sides. And this was using the subtraction property of equality. And they got 3.5 equals C. So let's try one on our own. And it shows us an example of the bar diagram method on the side here. The highest recorded temperature in Warsaw, Missouri is 118 degrees Fahrenheit. This is 158 degrees greater than the city's lowest recorded temperature. So the lowest recorded temperature plus 158 degrees equals 118 degrees. So that's my example. And so now let's find the lowest recorded temperature. So if I subtract 158 from both sides, I'll do some math on the side here because I know that if I take 158 minus 118, it'll give me the absolute value of my answer, and then the answer should be negative. So 8 minus 8 is 0, 5 minus 1 is 4, and 1 minus 1 is 0. So it's negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit is the lowest recorded temperature. Now let's take a look at the addition property of equality. The addition property of equality states that the two sides of an equation remain equal when you add the same number to each side. So whatever you add to one side, you have to add to the other. Gives us an example for number 4. It says solve x minus 2 equals 1. So if you add 2 to both sides, then you're left with x equals 3, and then they substituted in 3 for for x. 3 minus 2 is 1. 1 equals 1. Check. Now try E, F, and G on your own. So let's solve. Let's use the addition property of equality and add 3 to both sides. Y equals 4 plus 3 is 7. F, R minus 4 equals negative 2. Add 4 to both sides. R equals positive 2. For G, let's add 8 to both sides. And the reason I'm adding the number next to the variable is because I want to get the variable by itself. Q equals negative 9 plus 8, which is negative 1. Okay, moving on to our last problem for the notes. A pair of shoes cost $25. This is $14 less than the cost of a pair of jeans, so find the cost of the jeans. So they wrote a sentence, 25 equals J minus 14. Then they used the addition property of equality and added 14 to both sides. 25 plus 14 is 39 equals J. Now let's solve H. The average lifespan of a tiger is 17 years. This is 3 years less than the average lifespan of a lion. So the average lifespan of a tiger is 17 years, and this is 3 years less than the average lifespan of a tiger equals L minus 3. So write and solve an equation to find the average lifespan of a lion. If I add 3 to both sides, I'm using the addition property of equality. 17 plus 3 is 20, is the average lifespan of a lion. So let's write 20 years. Okay, those are all of the notes for Chapter 6, Lesson 1. Now give the independent practice problems a try and the power up.